Can New World actually make a comeback? Now, I don't want to be the harbinger of doom because there is a lot of New World that I do truly enjoy and I wish nothing but good for the game. But you'd have to have your head pretty much well and firmly in the sand to not realize that New World is consistently losing its players, albeit slowly over time. Before we jump into this video, I just want to say I've made a new MMO channel, which is just dedicated to the whole genre rather than a specific game. There will be a link in the description below. Please go check that out, especially if you're fed up with New World. So first, let's obviously have a look at the player numbers. Personally, I was never bothered about the large drop off from launch to a couple of months later. I think that sort of drop off was relatively to be expected. I do think New World contributed to that more than it possibly should have done with exploits and all that kind of stuff, but I think a big drop off was to be expected. Unless you're an MMO filled with bots, looking at you, Lost Ark. But anyway, since then, in the last couple of months, the numbers are on a slight decline over time. Much slower than the first couple of months, but it is still going down, just trickling down over time, with no real signs that it's going to bump up anytime soon. And for me, the worrying thing with that is even with the positive changes that have been made to New World over that time, we're not really seeing any indication that it's making that big of a difference. There was one exception where they did a free weekend and double XP weekend. That seems to have caused a little bit of a blip. Other than that, it's been a slight constant decline. So is this a massive issue? Should we be worried? And will the game make a comeback? Well, let's try and answer those in order. It's definitely an issue for a couple of reasons. Firstly, as I said, it's a little bit of a worry that even with the good changes that the game is making, it seems that the reputational damage to New World has already been done and is proving very difficult to overcome. And that's potentially a big issue for the game's future. So should we be worried about the future of New World? Well, in the short to medium term, I think the answer to that is no. I just don't think the player numbers are going to go so low that Amazon are going to pull the plug anytime soon. And really, if the game is still being actively developed and there's enough people on a server in your region to play with, well then, is it really worth worrying about? Well, no, because you can still have your fun and we can still enjoy the game. However, in the long term, well, the answer to the question if we should be worried or not really depends on what New World brings to the table and what Amazon do with it, and whether or not they'll do enough for it to make a comeback. And quite frankly, we simply don't know if they will or they won't do enough to achieve that. But let's start with the reasons why I think a comeback is possible. So personally, I think that Amazon are quite receptive to feedback. Basically, they do seem to truly listen to the community and make changes based on the feedback they receive. Sure, they're not going to dramatically and drastically change the game overnight, trying to make it a full loop PvP game that some players want, because I think they realize that that's a smaller part of the population than everybody else. And I'm pretty sure that Amazon have a more sophisticated way of getting feedback, and they're probably using a lot of like IT, AI tools to essentially collate that feedback. Like, I'm sure they're looking at exit surveys, I'm sure they're looking at the forum, the in-game feedback, even YouTube sometimes. But the key real thing is that they do listen to the community and they do act on it, which I think is a refreshing change really for gaming, and I think it's a great trait going forward. The counterpoint to that though is that AGS do seem a little bit slow to respond at times. Now that's either through inability or just slowness of processes. It's hard for me to say. An example of this is the orb system for expeditions. Quite frankly, pretty much at release we knew that was going to be a problem and people were going to be annoyed by it, and only now in July are we going to get that removed. Now that's pretty much like 9 months from launch to now. Did it really take that long to get that implemented and removed? Like, that just seems a little bit crazy to me that it's a little bit so slow. And that's just one example. Another reason though that I think a comeback is possible is that this is Amazon. I think their position in gaming is a little bit more strategic than just having one game. I think essentially they just want to be there or thereabouts. They want to be involved because they see the way that gaming is going in the future. Like, I think they're looking beyond just having a short-term profitable game, if that makes sense. But that doesn't mean that they won't pull the plug if they feel like they have to. Like, we've seen them cancel games before, for example. I think another reason that the game might make a comeback is quite simply the players were interested at one point, whether it be because of the combat like I am, or whether it be for the beautiful world that it presents. There's reasons to believe that people care about the game. Hell, we saw maybe like 1 million players all playing at once when the game was launched, and I think some players will give it a second chance. Okay, let's talk about some pitfalls and why a comeback may not happen. There's a couple of examples to me that just make you think that AGS consistently just missed the right decision by just a little bit. Yes, they listened to the feedback, but I think some of the positions they put themselves in shouldn't have put themselves there in the first place, if that makes sense. Should upgrading items have been limited to 600 like they initially planned? Obviously not. Should elite chest runs been the best way of getting your expertise up? Again, obviously not. Should expertise even be a thing? In my opinion, probably not. Should Great Cleave have been the best way of doing the PvP reward track when you've just released your arenas? I think we can all say probably not. Should they maybe have been working on Cross-Realm before the game even launched? I think probably so. Like, I think there's probably a much bigger list than this, but they're just the examples I can think of right now. My point is that they consistently making little decisions that are just like wrong. They're not massively wrong in the grand scheme of things, but they just cause enough friction between the players and the developers. And after a while, they're sort of like all adding up. In the end, it makes you question, why did that happen in the first place? Well, one reason could be for that, and I was watching the Nerdslayer video Death of New World, and he talks about this in a bit more detail. The developers of New World generally don't seem to have any MMO experience. Now, I personally think that they are obviously competent game developers. I just think that it's possible that they don't have the MMO experience, and that's causing some issues. Because sometimes it does really feel like it's an MMO made by people that have never made an MMO and perhaps never really played an MMO, or at least they don't play them very often. And I think that did have possibly some good consequences, like the combat and stuff like that, but I think ultimately it's also having some bad consequences. Like I mentioned Cross-Realm before, something like World of Warcraft implemented Cross-Realm before they got their first expansion. Could we not have learned the lesson that it ultimately was probably going to be needed before the game came out and actually been working on it before then? I have to question, why is there no group finder until July, many months after the game's release? Why are there no raids? A big question for me right now is, why is there no solo queue when it comes to arenas, or at least solo on solo matchmaking? So what I'm suggesting there is you could actually just keep the situation where it's just one queue, and then the game sort of like intelligently tries to pair you with solo players. So it says like, okay, we're going to try and match you with solo players. Okay, there's not enough solo players playing right now. We're going to match you with a duo and a solo or a trio. Basically to allow a situation where the smaller servers can still play and the bigger servers, you get matched with the solos. Like I've actually seen that happen in the Burning Crusade Classic with World of Warcraft again. They were doing that with their pre-mates for Battleground. New World could have learned that lesson, I think. And overall, it just seems that they don't really learn lessons from previous MMOs. And again, I think that causes friction and frustration for players. Look, the game is obviously not perfect. Let's be real. They're going to have to make some big changes for the game to survive and thrive in the long term. It's very likely that many systems are going to have to be reworked, and so you're left wondering if the game will actually be able to make a comeback. In the past, I had said and I had thought that the PvP arenas might be a catalyst for a comeback, but I don't think that happened for a few reasons. One, they fluffed it by making Great Cleave a better reward system than anything else. Two, there wasn't really any matchmaking either via ELO, role type, or solo queue as I mentioned before. And third, there was no ranked play. Like, quite frankly, the PvP arenas just didn't have enough in place for it to really make any difference to the player base in the long run. And personally, I have simply stopped playing arenas because of the lack of solo queue. I just find it frustrating, so I'm not bothering. So the arenas didn't do anything major. Now, I keep seeing people talk about how a new zone might revitalize the game, and quite frankly, I just don't think so. Or more accurately, I think it really depends on what comes with the new zone. We know that towards the end of this year, we're going to be getting the new zone Brimstone Sands, but as I said, it really depends what comes with that zone. Is there going to be an increase in gear score? Is there going to be an increase in levels? Is it a proper expansion? Are we going to go to level 70? Otherwise, you just make a new zone, and that's another place for me not to go whilst I log in and queue for some outpost rushes or do some mutations. Personally, I sort of expect the new zone to be a bit more of a catch-up system with maybe an increase in gear score, but I don't think it's going to be like the full reset going to 70. It's a little bit tricky to say because a new zone could be anything from almost no changes to absolutely massive changes. It really depends on if it's a proper expansion or not. Because I personally think that a New World paid expansion is when we will truly get our answer to whether or not New World can make a comeback. I think everything before that paid expansion will be about convincing the players that they are consistently making the right decision and that the game is just working the way that they want the game to work. Basically, winning back the trust of the players. We might see the odd thing blip the player numbers, but really I don't think we're expecting any massive player number changes until we get an expansion. Now, there are a couple of things that could make New World big again which aren't an expansion, but I personally don't think they will actually have that big of an impact. So let me talk about them. One, the game could go free to play. I don't think that will help. Lots of players already own the game and they've already stopped playing. A lot of players simply aren't playing not because of the box cost, because they don't find the game fun. And the free-to-play weekend didn't really actually bring any really new fresh blood into the game. Another thing they could do would be a console launch. Now, that would bump the interest in the game overall, and I actually do think it would be a good idea. I'm not 100% sure it would do all that much to the PC numbers, basically. No, I think a big proper paid expansion is when we're going to get the big changes and the big answer to whether or not the game will succeed or not, as it will basically let Amazon to try and convince everybody that they've changed and that the game has changed and that the game is better. I think that they will literally just ditch expertise. I also think they will literally just ditch randomized crafting. They will make sure that everybody knows expeditions are free to enter. They will fix everything that they can and want to fix, but they can't right now because it would involve changing too many systems. And one thing that will come with an expansion is that the players will know that it is effectively a reset, and they will know that they're not going to be massively behind, so now would be the best time to jump in again. For me, it's the one big chance of recovery. It will be back on the radars of that same 1 million people who stopped playing the first time around. I've said it before, I think this is the one and only chance. Players will give it a second chance, but I'm not sure they'll give it a third. My personal worry is simple. We don't really know what's going on behind the scenes at Amazon right now. How many people do they have working on the expansion? Is what we're seeing with the current live game everything that they can muster? We just simply don't know. If it was up to me, I would effectively be pulling the plug on the live game right now, not in terms of actually pulling the plug, but in terms of development. I would be trying to fix everything that they could fix without really changing the game massively, and I would probably put out the announcement for an expansion a little bit earlier, talking about all the good changes that they're going to make. It would essentially be that Hail Mary expansion, the one where it's like make or break, this is it, we think we've fixed everything, come and prove us wrong. And I personally sort of feel like we might hear something about an expansion towards the end of this year or early next year. Now, I can't tell you if that will be enough to save New World. I only hope that it is. But can New World make that comeback? Yes, I think so, but no, I don't think they're going to do it without an expansion. It's going to take something big and a lot of work on Amazon's part. I guess this whole video is a long way of me saying maybe, it depends. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do have a most beautiful day, like and subscribe. Goodbye.